Okay, so we're gonna start. We start the day talking about the state of the art of energy in Chile, where we can go with the future. And an important topic that we want to cover in the ChileMass Innovation Day was investment, right? So we have all of these wonderful ideas, but how are we really tackling from the financial point of view, and how do we think in the mechanism that's going to get us there with the real capital and the private capital that is going to make us transition and go to what we will call carbon net zero, and everything that has to happen to countries, companies, and even at the home level. So I'm here with two distinguished panelists talking more about the investment in ESG times, in decarbonization. You know already, Yuly, one another hat I have. I'm also advisor to Closed Loop Partners in New York, who is the largest investment in circular economy in the United States. And I'm going to be wearing the hat of also bringing in the Chilean reality to this panel, but also understanding how all of these pillars are important for the next wave of investment in this sector. So to start, I'm really excited to introduce you to two amazing people. One I have had the pleasure to work with, Libby and Brian. Will welcome you here in the Chilean community, because I'm sure people is going to be way more interested in what you do now that they know what you do. So before just starting talking about investment, I feel that we need to go back to the basic of introducing yourself. How did you got to this idea of investment, which for Chile is starting in a way that is more formal, but you guys been doing it for a while. So how do you go to do this, and where are you at now in the firms that you're respectively working? So maybe we can start with you, Libby.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with you guys, and so glad that you heard from Felipe. Oh, I think this is on already. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
okay.
I think it's really, you have to really close.
Yeah, I'm glad that you heard from Felipe as well earlier. And but yeah, I came to investing not necessarily as certainly not in a very direct route, and probably not in a very purposeful route either. I came really through the route of technology development and entrepreneurship, and a focus on bringing innovations in technology that can address climate change to large and impactful scale. So I started off as an engineer by training. Brian and I actually met in school, which was great to have relationships that go back so far. And at the time, spun a technology that I was working on with some friends and colleagues out, and started a company that we actually based in India. And found an opportunity to use the technology we were working on to help build out the cold chain for dairy. And I came back to the US and started working on some solar technology at SunPower, and then had the opportunity to serve as a technical appointee at the Department of Energy, focused on establishing new resources for transitioning technology to manufacturing. And I was passionate about that because throughout my career, that's where I had seen technologies really struggle to scale. It's very capital intensive, and there's still a lot of technical risk. So the people who usually fund the reduction of technical risk had kind of neglected that transition to manufacturing. And at the Department of Energy, we worked really across the government to establish several new resources for supporting that transition and the technology development. After that, I was excited to see what large corporations could do to accelerate technologies from early stages to having large impact. So I joined GE and led clean technology innovation across the company for a few years. And then I really had the great fortune of reconnecting with some yet old friends again at Breakthrough Energy Ventures, and became really excited about the platform that Breakthrough Energy Ventures is building to have several different tools to support innovation and technology development all the way through scale up and deployment. So I'll stop there. For me, investment has been a means to an end of figuring out how to support technologies in that transition and all the way to implementation and impact. And it's been great to be a part of it and glad to be here.
Thank you, Libby. Brian.
Yeah, so I think this will be an example of there's many routes into venture capital. My story is quite different from Libby's. But yeah, so I did undergrad at Tufts Physics and ultimately went to Washington, D.C. to follow my passion for hydrogen fuel cells. Acknowledging this was in 2001, so it was a bit early, right? But anyway, my father sat me down and said, hey, you're getting these offers to go to high finance in Wall Street, but you never really talked about that. Is that really what you want to do? And I said, I had this great experience in Australia with my physics teacher there, and that's where we studied renewable energy and hydrogen fuel cells. That would be really cool. And so I sort of approached the trade group in Washington, D.C. and created a job for myself. So I worked for a nonprofit, but had some really, really interesting experiences working with VCs, startups, big companies, everyone who had an interest with power gen or transportation going hydrogen. And so after that, I went to MIT, where we met Libby, did a lot of cool things over there relative to energy. But I was sort of the guy at MIT that had this really deep clean tech experience, which was pretty rare at the time, because this is 2006, where the clean tech focus within venture was really just emerging. And so I got into venture capital because I was pulled into it. They found me on campus, two funds. One was Mass Green Energy Fund. The other one was Advanced Technology Ventures in Waltham. And they said, hey, you know a lot about clean tech. We want to do more, so can you help us out? And so that's where I got pulled in, and I learned a lot about venture capital. And I liked it. And so when I graduated MIT, I got recruited out to the West Coast to join one of the older standing, we call them the pioneering funds in clean tech. So mine was Nth Power. They were on Fund 4, while everyone else was on Fund 1. So I said, an opportunity to bet on experience. 5 wonderful years there. We would call it the tailwinds we're having now, and we can talk more about that. But after that, I said, listen, I want to test myself as an entrepreneur. When you're early in venture, you always get this debate. Can you be a really seasoned, effective venture capitalist through pattern recognition, or do you have to be an entrepreneur yourself? And there's no right or wrong answer. It's just a debate. But at the time, I said, let me go try myself as an entrepreneur to be a better VC, or you see what happens. And so I have been a venture-backed CEO, acquired a patent out of Raytheon's innovation group, of all things, for actually agriculture, dairy, and did that for about 4 years. And then came back to investing, but this time on the strategic side. I led efforts for Konica Minolta in North America. And then, unexpected to me, McKinsey & Company came knocking, and they said, listen, we get asked all the time from our clients, how should big companies work with small companies, startups? And we don't really have a great answer. We never have. And so we need someone like you who's a practitioner. Would you like to come join us? And so I said yes. And it was wonderful, because I got to study corporate venture capital, done well and mostly done really poorly, but across, let's say, 7 different case studies, right? And work with clients in problem solving some of the major issues. And so that was certainly a good experience for me. And then after that sort of brings me to what I'm doing now. Copec had been working on what their strategy should be. And we got together, and ultimately they wanted me to come in and leave McKinsey to run what they were designing. And so in late 2019, they handed me sort of a sketch out of what they wanted, and I said, okay, I'll try to make that real. And sort of the rest is history. But yeah, so what I do now is I head up Wind Ventures, which is Copec's corporate venture capital arm. We are in San Francisco for strategic reasons, objectively strategic reasons, because we scout globally for the world's best across 3 themes: energy, mobility, and retail. And we want to attract the best into the region, really for two things. One, to do partnership or knowledge exchange activities with Copec, so Copec can say, hey, these are some areas that we should go into to help our transformation, but also by doing that to help Chile and the daily lives of Chileans. That's certainly on our minds every time we do this. And so just in a final comment, we've been doing this since really 2020 when I got the team together, and we now have a portfolio of 16, most of them with some sort of partnership opportunity. With Copec, where we have a second group called the Wind Garage, which is very, very important, and there's a flow from the Wind Garages here. You know, our value beyond capital is what we call unfair access to Latin America, to global founders, and that's how we do it well. We have my group scouting globally, but we have the partnership teams who are the local teams separate from core to co-create and co-capture value with these amazing startups.
Thank you, Brian. Today we're calling the panel Impact Investment, and I wanted to go back to definitions, right? So we have a group among investors that we go to impact meetings, and there's many different types of impact investment. People who is investing in education, which is also impact, people who is investing in social causes, which is social entrepreneurship and impact. But we're also in the times of facing what is going to happen with the regulations of ESG, right? And climate change. So from your own funds, so how you are kind of deploying capital, how are you guys defining impact in your respected funds?
Yeah, this is a great question because everyone defines it differently, and it's really important to understand, especially for any entrepreneurs in the room or investors who might look to syndicate with other investors. It's really important to understand what everybody's kind of business model is. So I'll tell you a little bit about Breakthrough Energy Ventures first, because I think that will help set some context. Breakthrough Energy Ventures was started a handful of years ago, really under the leadership of Bill Gates, as he wanted to get more personally involved in addressing climate change. It really started off as a policy effort where he and several of his colleagues worked with many, many companies who have who were very like-minded, that solutions to reducing emissions could also be exceptional business opportunities. So he worked with leaders of these companies to work with governments from around the world to kind of evolve a commitment to double R&D expenditures for clean technologies and technologies that could decarbonize sectors that today do not have solutions for decarbonization. And when they announced that policy initiative, Bill personally stood up and said, we're not putting this all on the private sector, or sorry, not putting this all on the public sector. Private sector has a stake in this too, and we're going to commit capital to this as well. So he, at the time, committed to a $1 billion venture fund to invest in technologies that can also decarbonize anything really across the entire economy. He ended up bringing the team in, raised the fund, and we're now investing out of our second fund. We have around 20-some amazing investors into our fund who are all very much like Bill, entrepreneurs and business leaders from around the world. And we invest in anything across the economy that can dramatically reduce carbon emissions. And importantly, represent a very significant investment opportunity. And the overall thesis of our fund is that climate change is absolutely real. It's causing more and more severe impacts on the global economy every year, every week, every day. And therefore, the entire economy needs to essentially be rebuilt. And there are several sectors of the economy that do not yet today have technical solutions for decarbonization. And those solutions represent the opportunity to be the seed of rebuilding the economy and build the next generation of absolutely massive and valuable companies. So what we do, how we think about impact, is we screen for opportunities for a massive reduction in carbon emissions. It usually has some sort of core technology at the center of it. For us, it doesn't necessarily have to, but that's usually the case. And then anything that passes that screen, we look for an opportunity to have an outstanding investment return. And so for us, we are not only investing for the impact, but the combination of impact and returns. We're very fortunate that our portfolio is performing quite well under that thesis to date.
Yeah, I think impact, we're certainly an impact fund, but I think you're right. There's a lot of different flavors of impact. In fact, I think the era of venture capital we're in is specialized VC funds, right? So it's everyone is doing venture capital, the expected 30% IRR after 10 years, but there's so much capital out there. You have to have a second hook. You have to have a second line of impact, saying, hey, we can do that. Plus, there's something that is hopefully distinctive and compelling to separate your capital from others' capital. So I think that's what we've been seeing. And so for us, we have two equally weighted mandates. One is financial return, and the second is strategic value to Copec. They are equal because I think the logic is if you don't have well-performing companies, it's really hard to get some strategic impact out of that endeavor, right? And so they're actually very much related. In fact, you need both. And so they're equally weighted, and we screen both equally. We'll typically screen for, I think, high potential investments. And then it's through conversation with the entrepreneurs where we get to talk about, hey, this unfair access that we offer, that's compelling. We think it's compelling, but it's distinctive. How might we leverage that for you? And that's that takes several conversations, but we hold both of them. And then the third thing I think I alluded to a little bit, but we hope number 1 and 2, the financial performance, the good financial performance, which then lends itself to hopefully good strategic impact, then hopefully has a positive impact on Chile itself and the daily lives of Chileans. And so we assess that as well.
Yeah, I think what you're bringing to the table is what I hear a lot in the conversations in Chile. Is impact sacrifice financial returns? And I guess the answer is no. In the work we do at Closed Loop Partners, we look at from the perspective of circularity and the circulation of materials. There are $10 billion of materials in landfill that nobody has been able to create technologies to create returns in that materials that needs to get back and biosphere. The other metrics that they use is how much waste is reduced, how many works are you creating, and how the deployment of capital is creating the circular economy now in the United States and expanding to Europe. So I think one myth to break today is that impact doesn't mean you're going to make money. It has to, because an economy relies on creating the capitals to keep growing the lives of people and the economies of cities that we discussed yesterday. One of the things that we always think, and I'm putting my hat as an entrepreneur in my past life, is it looks really far away for an entrepreneur that is starting. I'm going to go and pitch to an investor. They might have the technology, they might have the story, but I think with the years that we've been working in investment right now, what have you think the things that an entrepreneur had to start thinking when they're ready to receive capital in that seed, Series A, Series B? What has been your experience for that?
How to do it well?
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that come to mind. I think number one, just referencing a prior comment, the capital is a spectrum of capital to go after, right? So everyone is saying, listen, we want yield, yes, but we have the superpower that we want to leverage with our portfolio companies. That separates us from all the other firms. And so you have to really get to know what is their superpower, and does that work for you? Is that the type of partner that you want to work with, right? So In my case, unfair access to Latin America. Are you ready to do that? Is that of interest to you, this TAM expansion opportunity that is somewhat of a light lift for you? For many it is, but for a lot it's not, and it's a timing issue usually. I say also, be prepared to have the pitch, but don't necessarily do the pitch, if you know what I mean. The best thing, because through the interaction, it's about two potential companies coming together with a North Star and aspiration to do something that's high risk and hopefully high impact and rewarding and also fulfilling. And you have to come at it with, this is a people-driven business, right? And so you need to get to know me if you're pitching me. You don't want to pitch me to do that, where you're talking and I'm just listening, right? You want to have your pitch deck, but you want to have a conversation. You want to get to know my background and what our secret power is and have a conversation around how we can apply that to you. My first question, if I'm allowed to ask one, is always, what's your founding story? I'd love to hear that, because I have my own founding story when I did a startup. I just love to hear, how did you get here? How did we get here? And a lot of entrepreneurs, they go straight to their pitch deck. Here's the vision, here's the mission, here's the team. That's all really great stuff, but I could read that. I want to get deeper when I'm talking to someone and say, hey, are we going to be good partners? Can we do this together? So it's an approach.
It's a relationship.
Yeah, you're starting a relationship.
Yeah. Libby, what's your take?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, first of all, fundraising is hard. Finding investments that you think make sense is also hard. It's a lot easier to put money out the door than it is to necessarily bring it back. But even still, it's challenging in both respects. And so I think the two things I would keep in mind as entrepreneurs is that it is hard. It takes time. You see a lot of announcements of these amazing rounds that have come together, and it looks like it just happened overnight. But there were months or years of blood, sweat, and tears and sleepless nights and health issues from stress and who knows what else that obviously are not going to be in the press release. So just keep that in mind when it feels really hard and like, why is everybody else doing this so easily? They're not doing it easily. And then the other thing is for the investors that you bring on, you're interviewing them as well. You know, you are selling something to them that's very valuable, and that's equity in your company. It is a possibility to partner together to build something extremely valuable. And so you need to be selective with that. So, keep that in mind. I really like Brian's advice about, talk about how you got to where you are, hear how, to the extent that you can, make it almost a two-sided interview. Sometimes, at least initially, it's a little bit screening oriented, but keep it in mind that that you have something really valuable, and you should kind of exercise as much scrutiny on your investors as your investors will exercise on the companies that they're considering.
Yeah, and I think it's also the idea that you need to know when you need the capital. And that a no is not a no. It is not fitting within the investment hypothesis. So it's not that I'm not liking you. It's not a personal. It's more about, it's truly a matchmaking of vision, capital, and expectations of what that company is going to go.
Yeah, I think about it as hiring a board member and a whole bunch of support staff.
Yeah.
So what is that board member capable of? What is their firm, their support staff basically capable of? What have they done in the past? What does their portfolio represent to you in terms of opportunity for partnerships and synergy? And are they in the field? Do they know, how to partner with a company in these kinds of stages? So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So I want to go now in sectors, right? So that's the entrepreneur coming to us and asking and thinking, what is that side? But you are about at least sector agnostic, but with the big mission of decarbonization. So the first step is understanding that piece. and you have already developed some pillars of where the fund is now going and developing those sectors. Maybe we'd like to know more about that and how that was a decision potentially for you, Brian, in understanding that, because you're matching companies that want to go to Latin America. So how that went about?
Yeah, I mean, we have the three pillars, and just to remind, it's energy, mobility, and retail. These are the three areas that Copec has a lot of resources, right? So going back to our superpower of how we can help entrepreneurs scale, it's opening those up to them so that they can leverage that and scale in a quicker way, but also with less risk. And so that's how we came about with those four pillars. We are doing some things further afield from that, and let's say category other more and more, because
It's always there. Entrepreneurs know that.
yeah, because we are, but even within other, the lenses that I talked about before, where we look at financial return profile, we look at the strategic impact potential for Copec plus on the entrepreneur, we're still using those. We are just finding other sectors outside those three pillars where we can find those sort of opportunities, and so that's quite exciting. So I can go deeper into each one, but those are three pillars.
Yeah, and I think, Libby, what has been today the decarbonization? I mean, Ventures has been investing for a while now, so what have you think is now and what's coming in this investment for decarbonization?
Yeah, it's a broad scope.
Yep.
How long are we going to be here? We've got a lot of work to do, everybody. But maybe I'll just try to sketch out a little bit. So yeah, as Yuly mentioned, we invest in anything across the economy that can lead to decarbonization and a pretty significant reduction of carbon emissions. We divide it up into 5 categories: electricity, transportation, manufacturing, buildings in the built environment, and food and ag. But that doesn't necessarily narrow down the universe, because if there's something that doesn't fit into one of those categories neatly, we'll stick it in somewhere. So yeah, our team is incredibly, incredibly broad. Maybe what I will say is in terms of like what's next. The early 2000s and before then even was the era of a lot of innovation in wind and solar, which have now become extremely mainstream. Some of the lowest cost of energy technologies you can deploy, widely deployed, very risk, the risk has been almost completely eliminated. People finance these deployments with extremely low cost of capital, for example. But when you look at how far they've penetrated, they're only single-digit percentages of electricity generation globally. So you have to ask, well, why is that? We've been at this a while, and it's absolutely the lowest cost resource that you can deploy. And there are several reasons. Obviously, they're intermittent. And so once you account for the intermittency, and if you want to have firm power, the costs all of a sudden are actually higher than competing costs like natural gas and coal. The resources aren't necessarily in the places where there's demand for electricity. So then you start to need long duration storage, you need extremely low cost storage, you need transmission. And then there are a whole number of sectors that do not have economic technologies today that can eliminate carbon emissions. So, steel, for example, concrete, cement production for concrete, that one's kind of a sneaky one because they are another, the production of cement is another process that actually liberates geological sources of carbon and puts it in the atmosphere. So that's a tricky one we need to pay a lot of attention to. So I think some of those industries are now starting to gain more appreciation and the role that they can play in transitioning to a really fully clean economy. Thinking about transportation, early 2000s also, we saw a lot of advancements in lithium-ion batteries that are now enabling electric vehicle electrification. And really early on in our fund, we started thinking about our thesis in the supply chain to enable the truly scalable production of batteries. And we are very happy to be partnering with Lilac Solutions. You heard from Felipe, I think, earlier, who has a great technology to open up new lithium production assets, and also do so in a environmentally benign manner, which is really important to us as well. So now we're thinking about, okay, what are the supply chain materials, and also beyond lithium for electrification, nickel, cobalt. How do you develop battery technologies that use different materials, for example? So we're starting to think in general about, okay, for the technologies that exist, how can we make them cheaper? How can we think about how to make them more ubiquitous or perform better, like, you know, through long duration energy storage, things like that, thinking about supply chains. And then an area for us that we found there really has not been a lot of entrepreneurial activity until recently is food and ag. So we've been really excited about food and ag. I could go on, but maybe I'll stop there as a few examples.
Yeah, no, it's true, because I'm going to spell a secret with Libby. The first step when Libby goes into this is, okay, how many CO2 are we going to save? And it's exciting because it's agnostic, but it goes across the economy, and it gets harder for developing the investment hypothesis, but it's what really has to happen. So that's exciting piece of what we do here. I'm going to share a little bit of the closed loop, because I think it will be relevant for us to kind of spread out the spectrum of technologies that also require this type of investment. Closed loop invested in Algramo in Chile. And I remember the times when Unilever is one of the limited partners of Closed Loop, and approach Ron, the CEO in New York, and say, we have this company from Chile. And luckily, there was a Chilenita in the fund that could translate what this really means. And Algramo is really creating a model of refilling, because closed loop, one of the materials that has focused in the first 6 years of existence is plastics, right? So we have all of this movement of what is going to happen to plastics, but we don't really have solutions. And Algramo is being piloting and testing the refilling of packaging, so you don't need to make more bottles of shampoo, more bottles of things. And probably the people in Santiago, in the almacenes, know Algramo as a local entrepreneur that really is making impact in the city, but now they are deploying commercial locations here in the United States and also in Europe. So why an investor from United States will look at Algramo? Well, the model that is occurring in Santiago de Chile could be really important for the rest of the world. And the amount of waste in the monomers and the PET that has to be reduced in the planet can start from those local examples. So looking also agnostic in geography helps you find those entrepreneurs that are going to create that impact in investment, but also in the changes of societies that we are creating with these technologies as we enable them to exist in different supply chain, manufacturing processes, companies that want to kind of shift business and move on. I want to open the podium for questions, but I think from the previous panel we got in a conversation on this clean tech 1.1, 1.0, Brian say. But we've been talking a lot about hydrogen, and hearing your story that you started there, I wanted to take this panel also to talk about hydrogen, because Chile has put a lot of effort in thinking in hydrogen. And I would love to hear your perspectives in how are we seeing that as the next thing, and especially in our sector, for the mining sector, is something that we really continue to look at how we decarbonize that industry. Go for.
Yeah. So the attention with hydrogen is nice for me personally, because again, I started my career there. There was a lot of talk about the hydrogen economy under the second Bush administration when I was in DC, but it really didn't go anywhere. But it was sort of an introduction of the concept. And the concept is that, hey, hydrogen can come from many different pathways, feedstocks, meaning it can be made from many different ways, but then it can also be used in many different ways, right? So it's sort of an energy carrier, if you will, a little bit like electricity. And so this could help decarbonize the energy landscape, because you could start with, sort of low carbon but not no carbon ways of producing hydrogen, and then get the utilization technologies, either the internal combustion engines or the fuel cells or what have you, to use hydrogen sort of out there in the field. And then at the right time, when cost is down, you can then sort of insert green molecules, if you will, because everything is now set up. That's the concept anyway. My perspective now is that it's an energy carrier with a lot of unknowns on what the actual use cases are going to be. But what's exciting is that there's a lot of interest in it, and we're now seeing very large, I don't know if you call them pilots, but very large constructions and production systems, and meant to go into fueling ships and even cars, or trucks even. But at the same time, you've got Maersk, at least what I know publicly, Maersk sort of promoting not hydrogen or ammonia, but actually methanol. And so you're seeing sort of a very heterogeneous landscape of what will happen, and so it's going to be interesting. But there's a lot of money being thrown at it. I think from the Wind Ventures point of view, it's clear, right? So we have the advantage of saying, listen, we scout globally, so it's a global local model. We call it glocal. And we get to test our investment theses with the Chilean geography. And so I probably don't need to say much about hydrogen in Chile, but if you know that the cost of green hydrogen, 60 to 80% of that cost is the cost of renewable energy, and then you say, where in the world has the cheapest renewable energy? It's Chile. The best solar and wind resource, but also the longest capacity factors for both. And then you can even combine the two, maybe, because the capacity factors don't overlap exactly. That's another benefit. So better than Australia and even the Middle East. And so there's a tremendous unfair advantage, if you will, from a geographic perspective. So the clarity that we get in our investment thesis is saying, okay, this is the pathway, this Chilean geographic pathway is what we are going to focus on, which would be sort of renewable energy to likely a PEM electrolyzer of some sort that can handle intermittent power into something, maybe a pipeline that could act like a buffering battery of some sort. And that was actually, we made an investment in that called H2 Pro out of Israel. So what's also interesting, I'll point out, back in the day, you had three types of electrolyzers, and there was no fourth. You had PEM, solid oxide, and alkaline. Everything was pushed into those things. We're now seeing brand new categories. So the reinvention. So H2 Pro is a total reinvention. Actually, the inspiration is from a flow battery. We're now seeing, saying, hey, PEM is low temperature, solid oxide is high temperature, but the waste heat we can get out of a lot of industrial waste is sort of in the middle. Let's create a new one for that, because then we take that heat direct on. It's a new category of electrolyzer. And so I think it's getting really, really interesting. But our focus has been on how to create momentum around Chile. And that was the whole thesis behind H2 Pro, where in combination with what Chile has naturally could be really, really interesting.
Libby.
And for us, we've looked at hydrogen first and foremost as an industrial gas that's used and consumed throughout different industries for a number of purposes, and it's extremely carbon intensive to produce this material. It's usually produced through steam methane reforming that, again, liberates carbon from natural gas. And so our priority has been to, first of all, just decarbonize that industrial process. So how can we make hydrogen without evolving CO2 and from the steam methane reforming process? And so we have done a lot of work across all these different categories, agree there are new categories now of producing hydrogen, and have made several different investments in electrolysis, in methane pyrolysis, and other ways of producing hydrogen. And then we're also starting to look at new applications for hydrogen. There's going to be a debate, I think, for quite a while about hydrogen use in industrial processes like steel making, transportation, things like that. We certainly think that there is an opportunity for hydrogen for really tough to decarbonize transportation sectors like aviation in certain circumstances, and then for other very difficult to decarbonize transportation sectors, we think that liquid fuels will be around for a long time. So we've been looking at ways to produce liquid fuels in a scalable manner, and the feedstocks that we think are most scalable are CO2 and hydrogen. And guess what the biggest cost component of producing fuels ends up being? It's hydrogen. So by working on ways to reduce the cost of hydrogen and to produce hydrogen without emitting CO2 emissions, that's our kind of primary focus today, and that will have impact in all these different applications that may arise.
Yeah, so the future is in Chile, and we need to do it environmentally, and we need to understand the business model quicker so we can be there for the world. I want to open the panel to questions from you guys. I have asked most of the questions right now, but anybody in the audience who wants to raise their hand and ask? Alan, and then Pedro.
Thank you. I have a quick question for Brian. Based on your experience, one thing is the financial return of the investment. So when you have a strategic investment, I guess another challenge is how do you do it once you close the deal to be able to incorporate that investment in the business units? How's Copec's experience been in that sense? And what can we learn from that experience?
Yeah, great question. This is sort of how do you build the capability to do this well, right? And so, when we designed this over probably a year. Copec has been thinking about this for much longer, but actually designing how do we build this specific Copec capability, world class, over a year of that. And we talked a lot about that, but we solved for being distinctive, our value, and that's the unfair access to Latin America. No one had really gone to North America or Europe to offer that to global services and bridge south, so we think we're still the first, so distinctive. We think it's compelling because of what's happening in Latin America. Growing affluency in the middle class, everyone has a smartphone, really high urbanization rates. It's a large, across the continent, it's very large. It's actually from people, it's larger than the US. And then to your question, how do we make that real, that unfair access? And we worked very, very hard on that. And so Wind is really an open innovation platform. It's not a corporate venture capital firm. What I run is part of it, but it's not it entirely. And so there's really two groups on this Wind platform that Copec owns. One is my team, obviously, and I've explained what we do. We scout globally and try to bring the best and the brightest to Chile. The other team is called the Wind Garage, and there's actually two of them now. There's one in Chile and there's one in Colombia. And these teams are actually much larger than Wind Ventures. There's separate teams for each of our pillars, energy, mobility, and retail. And they get to think about new opportunities and new directions for Copec to go into. They get to launch new businesses if they feel like they have the three key ingredients: tech, talent, and knowledge. And for us, they're the partnership team, where typically everyone says this is a good opportunity, but we're lacking the technology and probably the knowledge also. So let's bring in a partner to do that together. But they're dedicated, they're separate from core. So it's a startup-friendly and dedicated capability to do exactly what you asked about. So it's not an inexpensive capability to build, but in our case, it was the right way to do it.
Pedro.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question to Libby. Brian referred a little bit to ammonia. So I wanted to know your perspective with respect to green ammonia production as an energy vector as well, because of the production possibilities, but also the easy way of probably
Yeah. Ammonia is another really important industrial kind of material, and we have been looking at it for how can you kind of leverage renewables to produce ammonia. So similar to the thesis behind H2 Pro about the possibility to integrate kind of hydrogen production into renewable energy assets, we also have been working on a thesis in that regard. We have one portfolio company called Remo that is building these integration solutions, and then agree that it could be a good hydrogen carrier. It could be an actual energy carrier for use in transportation or other purposes. So yeah, definitely been paying attention to that.
Thank you. I just want to do the educator of me. Investment hypothesis is what we believe it will make it. That's the definition. And then you.
Thank you. Just one question for both. In this equation, you have corporations. And probably you are in the innovation part, but when you go to the business, you got a lot of problems in terms of explaining the business or to go to the board to defend what you have. So tell us, I have that problem, with A, big, and more corporations, so every time I try to sleep, I don't have the right answer, so I just wake up in the morning and say, what am I going to say to this guy? Because I see the innovation, but they don't see it. So it's me, or it's you, it's both. So what's it, in your experience, because for you, Brian, are in San Francisco, but Copec is in Chile, you have to build those bridges, and in your case, it's the same thing. So you have some, I don't know, guessing with that.
Yeah, well, do you want to start?
Happy to start, yeah. In my opinion, especially given my McKinsey work, this is where a lot of corporates sort of get it wrong, because CVC is what I think, from the outside in perspective, what most corporates do for external innovation.
Yeah.
The reality is that it's one of a spectrum of models to engage startups, right? And going to CVC is saying you're going to the deepest way to engage startups and really the most difficult to do well and the most expensive, because you need investment and everything. And so I think it's to all corporates' benefits to take a step back and say, hey, this is our growth strategy for the next 10 years. Yeah, this is sort of CEO and board level discussion, but here's our growth strategy. Where does engaging startup fit in? What are the objectives to engage startups? Is it to market sense? We just want to know what's going on. We don't feel our core is at risk. The best model to do that would probably be a scouting group, maybe in some locations. If it is, hey, no, our core business is actually really at risk. We don't know when, but we know, people they're not going to be buying our stuff for real reason. That's where you may want to, hey, we should go into new directions. A CVC allows us to get on the cap table, do really thorough diligence, and to then be able to make really high-quality partnership decisions, but also influence M&A and actually transform ourselves to future-proof, right? Just two sort of examples on the bookends. And so the key of that, and if you do that, you will have the right model for the objectives, and you'll have these objectives that are now part of corporate strategy that you will always be able to reference as the North Star of why you exist to whoever's asking. Either middle management, I exist to do this. It's part of corporate strategy. Or if the board, right? Hey, remember, we're doing this for corporate strategy. Here I'm making this recommendation. The impact is X, Y, and Z, and it's all aligned with this, right? So it's a way to justify your investments and what happens.
Yeah, so Brian has really studied this, so I would, that's probably just barely scratching the surface. I can kind of reflect based on my time at GE, where I saw a lot of this from inside the company, and just based on the corporate partners that we work with across our portfolio. But so, my experience, this is certainly not to kind of opine on what's good or bad, or what was like good or bad or well done or poorly done at GE. I think GE had a great they were a leader, like way ahead of their time, all the way from the CEO, really through employees, about the possibility to grow the business with new technologies that are clean technologies, reduce carbon or renewable energy. So I think they really had strong strategic direction. They had a lot of employee support. And then, so they had kind of the will and the engagement to do it. The patience was harder. And so when you are a part of an operating company that's a multi-billion-dollar company, and the business lines that are getting resources on an annual basis are multi-billion-dollar business lines themselves, and you're starting to kind of develop innovative ideas from inside, I found that the patience for new ideas was about 18 months. Yeah. And the level at which a new idea kind of got attention and resources was once it broke around $1 billion in the top line for the P&L. And like, show me a single startup that goes from 0 to $1 billion in top line in 18 months. Doesn't exist. No. So internal innovation within a corporate environment can be really, really difficult, was my takeaway from my N of 1 sample size. So I think working with startups externally is a great way to kind of support some of the early stages of exponential growth and then realize the value of the later stages of exponential growth, because like that's what people are so bad at judging is, okay, this is growing, it feels like it's growing slowly, it's still really small, but the rates are good, but the top line is small. But when the rates are good, then the top line gets really big really fast, but not until the second half of the chessboard, if you're familiar with that analogy. So it's always harder to do things with more than one entity. Like, it's hard to work internally, collaboratively internally within a single entity, so it's always harder to do it externally. But where I find that it works really well to partner either as a partnership or equity investment or whatever with an external entity that's a startup is where you think the corporate entity won't really have patience to see the exponential growth kind of in the early years. Hope that helps.
Yeah, and I think it's also about risk, right? So in the cap table, when the corporate investor is there, it's also you're de-risking the company, because you could have that type of access to resources that the company can make it, because now they have a corporate in the cap table. So I think from the side of the entrepreneur, it's a really important de-risking opportunity for the business at the right time, I will add. Okay, so Libby, I know you have to go, so I'm going to close it to the last one with him, and then we finish the panel.
Just very straightforward, practical question. What would be, I know it varies depending on the investment, but what would be your average ticket size in terms of investment? What would be your average expected internal rate of return to see how much of the company is willing to offer? And what would be the average range for an exit in terms of years? So to see if we can fit in with what you're looking for.
Yeah, happy to start. We invest pretty early, so we will invest, even down to $100K, a couple $100K, very, very early stages, and kind of inception stage, pre-seed and seed, and Series A. Those are our really core positions where we'll enter. Occasionally, we'll do a B. Earlier in our existence, we had a much broader spectrum of when we would make a first investment. And then the check sizes for the first investment kind of vary based on the stages. And we do look for, over 10x return on all invested capitals, not just the first investment, but we'll, follow on, if the company is doing well and we feel like it's sticking to our thesis together. So we expect well over a 10x return from our successful investments. And when you do kind of the math on those sorts of things, you find out pretty quickly you need really like over $1 billion exit for that kind of math to work out.
And time frame of exit?
Yeah, we have a longer life fund. We have a 20-year fund. That's not saying that we're expecting to exit everything in the last few years of that fund. It does give us a little bit more opportunity for our really exceptionally growing companies, for us to hold on to some of those for a little bit longer and realize some later value creation. But yeah, it varies. But again, patience is a thing that,
That was fun, so
yeah,
it's a hard one.
yeah.
Yeah, for us, the investment strategy is pretty straightforward. For us, it's Series A or later, but we like the later because I think, as I explained, we do cross-border investments, and so there's an element of added risk there. So later is one way to mitigate that. But Series A or later, check size $2 million to $6 million. We've done up to $30 million when the conviction runs super high, but it's typically a portfolio of 2 to 5 for the first check. And then on follow-ons, yeah, we want to be there as a growth partner for those who are still aligned with the original thesis or something as interesting. And that's typically our pro rata. And then timing to exit, we got actually pretty lucky with the whole SPAC stuff, and so we had 2 well-performing SPACs, so earlier than expected. But really the expectation is you build your portfolio. Ours is sort of ours is 2 things. Ours is balance sheet investing, and so there's no end of life, but we manage it as a group as if it's a 10-year fund, just for we can compare against benchmarks. And so first 3 years, build out the portfolio, the remaining of that fund, 7 years, nurture that portfolio. So we've just completed our fund 1, let's say, portfolio 1 rather, and next year we'll start building out portfolio 2. That's just internal accounting stuff. But then we can compare against benchmarks.
Expected IRR range?
Better than top tier, which is what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, with that, we're going to conclude our last panel for the day. We start in a really high tone. We are ending in a really high tone. Thank you so much for being here for the ChileMass community. It's exciting what you're doing, Brian, in Chile. Libby, welcome to the family. I'm going to announce Brittany to kind of close the panel, but in this one we're closing, and then Brittany is going to give the final words of the day. So that's how we're ending today, and I pass it to you, Brittany.